Hi, it's Howell and welcome back to my channel. In today's sewing tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make these cozy fleece ear flap hats. It's a simple sewing project that I think you'll really like. And what I really like about this hat pattern that's unique is that I'm going to show you how you can add a scarf to the back of the hat, so it's a hat scarf. The hat can be made with a scarf with a chin strap, especially for the little ones, or ties. This hat pattern comes in sizes from an infant all the way up to an adult large, and they are really fun to make up. So without any further delay, let's jump right into the project. First thing, let's go over the items and things that you'll need. Of course, you'll need some fleece. You can make these hats all one color, or you can make them two different colors. You can line them or not line them. So there's all kinds of options with the fabric. If you haven't watched my video on my top 10 tips for sewing with fleece, I encourage you to watch that before you sew up this. It will give you some great tips and maybe help you avoid some mistakes that you might make while sewing up with this stretchy, cozy fabric. You'll need the pattern downloaded and printed and assembled, and it's just putting two pieces of paper together and taping them. Really simple. I'll put the link in the description below where you can access the pattern. You'll want a measuring tape to measure the head that you're making the hat for, so you get the optimal fit, because age isn't a real accurate measurement. You'll need a pair of paper scissors to cut out your pattern, a pair of fabric scissors, and you can use a rotary cutter, which I really like to use. You'll need long pins. I really like these flower pins, and I do like to use these fabric clips. The hats can be made using a regular sewing machine, and I'll show you what stitch to use, or you can use your serger. If you have a serger, by all means use it. It makes the process go a lot quicker, but a sewing machine is still very doable and easy to use. You want to make sure that you're using the correct type of needle, and I do recommend either a universal needle or a ballpoint needle. If you're making a hat with ties, you'll need a turning stick. And if you want to add a label or tag, have that handy. So a few things that I'm going to mention just briefly about fleece is it does have a nap to it. If you cut your pieces out and you don't keep them all going the same direction, it will look a little funky and a little weird, and it might even look a different color. So like this headband piece here, the pattern says to put this on the fold. You would want to place the second one the same direction. Even though I flipped it over, it's still the same direction. Does that make sense? But you wouldn't want to cut one out and then flip it like this to save fabric. You'll be tempted to do that, but don't do it. On my pattern, I do have a recommended way to lay this out so that you can use your fabric optimally and not waste a lot of fabric. But you can, if you're using scraps of fleece, you can cut it out however you want to, keeping the pieces in the same direction and on the correct stretch. I forgot to mention is showing you how to tell the right and the wrong side of fleece fabric, because it can get kind of tricky. So as you can see on the selvaged edge, it doesn't stretch much. It stretches a little bit, but compared to this cut edge, look how stretchy that is. When I pull the fabric on the stretch, which side does it curl to? It curls to the wrong side, and this is the right side. Sometimes when you're cutting fleece out and you don't have the selvage edge to compare to, you just have this fluffy piece of fabric and you're like, this is the selvage edge that doesn't stretch very much, this is the stretch, and this is the right side because it's curling to the wrong side. So I hope that's helpful. Fleece fabric comes on the bolt and it's pretty wide. It's usually like 58 to 62 inches wide, which is pretty wide for fabric. And when I'm cutting my pieces out, I have indicated where to apply it on the stretch. So this, as you can see, this is the selvaged edge, the manufacturer's edge, and it looks like this. I have opened up the piece of fabric, it's really wide, and I have folded it, the selvage edges, into the center so that I have two edges that are on the fold. Since I need to cut out two of the headbands, I'm going to make this one multicolor, so I'm only going to cut out one of the gray. But if I were to cut out two, I could cut one out. This says to put it on the fold, so I would cut out one this direction and one this direction. And then I could cut out my crown pieces in these places. And I need 4 of the crown pieces. So I'm going to cut out one of these. I'm going to use a scrap piece of pink fabric for the inside of the headband. And then I will have the crown pieces be the gray. So to cut those out, this indicates to put it on the fold. I'm going to line up that edge with the fold and pin it in place. I'm making the hat with the ties. The indicated line, dotted lines where it says to cut out for a hat with ties. Now if I were cutting this, making a hat with the attached scarf, I would use this dotted line. And if I'm cutting it out for a child, let's say a child's hat that has the chin strap, the pattern comes down like this and across. It all depends on what variation. But for this hat that I'm showing you, I'm going to show you one with the ties. I really do like using a rotary cutter. And on these notches, you'll want to cut the notch outward. That's why I'm using a pair of scissors for this part. I need to cut out 2 strips for the ties. And those strips are going to measure 2 inches by 16 inches. I like to buy a little extra fabric in case I want to make a cozy neck warmer or a pair of fingerless mittens, which are really quick and simple to make up, and they make a cute bundled gift. I do have the pattern and the tutorial available. Links in the description below. By the way, if you have questions about where to get some of these items that I use, always check in the description because I put links to all kinds of things in there that might answer your question. For that second headband that I need to cut out, this is a scrap of fleece. There's no selvaged edge, there's no finished edge. How do I tell how to cut this out? I pull it, that's pretty stretchy. This is more stretchy. When I pull it, curls to the wrong side. That means this is the grain of the fabric. So I'm gonna fold this over and we'll see if I have enough of this piece. And I don't. Luckily, I have another piece of pink fabric that I can use. There's the selvaged edge. And this one doesn't have one, but there's the stretch. So let's fold that over. When you're using a rotary cutter, you want to make sure you're always cutting away from your body and away from your fingers. Rotary blade cuts are not fun. Save your strips of fleece because strips of fleece make really cool and nice binding. I have a tutorial showing you how to bind a lot of my projects with fleece binding, which is so cool and easy to work with. Gives such a nice stretchy finish. And so I encourage you to watch that video. Set those aside for a minute. Now let's talk just a little bit about your sewing machine settings. You can use a regular sewing machine, but you'll want to use a lightning bolt stitch or a small zigzag stitch, especially on the parts of the item that you're sewing that is going to be stretched. Like around the headband, want to for sure use a stretch stitch. Most machines will come with that lightning bolt stitch, and this is what it looks like. Or you can just use a regular zigzag stitch with a setting of 1.5 width and 1 to 1.5 in length. So it's very short and very narrow. That is going to give you a stretch stitch. So when the item of clothing is stretched, the seam is not going to pop and leave holes in the seam, and you don't want that. If you have a serger, by all means use it. It gives you that stretch stitch, it finishes the edge, and it is a lot quicker. But it's not necessary. You can still use your sewing machine with great success. And what I love about fleece fabric, it's not going to fray, so you don't have to worry about finishing off those seams. So the hat with the ties, the first thing that we'll do is sew the ties. Fold right sides together, sew down the long side and then the bottom end. You want to leave the top end open so that we can turn it inside out. And I'll show you what it looks like on the sewing machine and the serger. This lightning bolt stitch and the zigzag stitch does take a little bit longer, but it is worth it. When I get down to the end, I'm going to lift up my presser foot, leave my needle down, and pivot so I can sew across the bottom. And I have left the top open so that I can turn it right side facing out. Lift up your presser foot, lift up the tip of the presser foot, and then slide the fabric so it touches, is butt up against your needles. Let that come down, put your presser foot back down. I have my edge of my fabric right there, which will be my 3/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to start sewing. And to sew along the bottom, I'm going to sew up to the edge, take my hand wheel, turn it towards me to lift up my needle, lift up my presser foot, pull it back just a little bit, pivot it, bring it back underneath, put my presser foot down. So that is a little bit quicker, right? It stretches just like that lightning bolt stitch on your sewing machine. Now we're going to turn these right side facing out. On this one, I'm going to trim down the seam just a little bit. That's a little bulky. Poke your corners out with the stick. The next thing we'll do is sew the headband, pin it up and place it right side facing up, and this is the end of the tie that we're going to place in the center of this curve here on the ear flap. I'm going to let it extend out maybe 1/4 of an inch and just clip it in place. Take the other one and apply it to the same area. Then take the other headband piece, find the right side, and I'm going to use a pin to pin that strap or that tie in place. Line up all the raw edges and apply some clips or pins. Sew around and stop here. Do not sew the sides. While I'm at the sewing machine, I'm going to sew up the crown pieces. Place them right sides together, and we're just going to be sewing one side from the bottom up to the top, and then we'll open those up and then sew those two together to make one cap. So this is the tip that I give on my top 10 tips for fleece, is when you're sewing a bulky fleece pieces together, and when you start, most of the time you're going to get this top layer bunching up and then it stitches, and so you don't have a nice clean start. Regular cotton fabrics don't have that problem. So to alleviate that, which is really annoying, is you can take your scissors and just make a little notch. And this seems tedious, but it really does make a nice start to that edge. Lift up your presser foot, lift up the tip of the presser foot, and slide the fabric in till it hits against the needles. Release that, make sure that you put the presser foot back down and start stitching. Make sure your edges are lined up, go slow. I'm just putting the fabric along the edge. The knife's just barely taking a little bit off. So when you go over this, all these layers, you're going over 4 layers right here. So just go slow. And if you need to take your hand wheel and turn it towards you a few times when it's just struggling, you can do that. Another thing you can do if you find your machine is struggling is this little lever. If you have a lever that lessens the pressure on your presser foot, you can do that. And so I've adjusted that so it's a little bit lighter in pressure. take the headband and fold one of the pieces down, and we're going to bring those two ends together, right sides facing together, and line up that center seam. Now if you're using the sewing machine and you have just a seam allowance there, you can open up the seam allowance so it's flat, but since these pieces are sewn together, I'm going to flip one of the seam allowances this way and the other this way. That will alleviate a lot of bulk in that area, but I want to make sure that that center part of the seam is lined up. And then I'll just take it to the machine and sew down that seam, and then we'll sew our crown pieces. And once again, I'm going to make that little notch. I'm going to open up the crown pieces, place them right sides together, lining up the notches and that center seam. And then I'll sew all the way around. You can open up this, pull the ties out. The next thing we need to do is find the center points, both the front and the back and the side center points. So to do that, I'll line up the back seam, pin that or clip it in place, and then fold it in half. And that fold is the center front. Find the center sides, line up the front center and the back center. With the wrong side facing out and the right side of the crown piece facing out, we're going to insert the crown piece and line up and pin in place on those quarter points. And then we'll take it to the sewing machine and sew all the way around. Now if you want to line the hat, I'm going to go over that a little bit later. So if you are lining a hat, stop here and click on that link in the chapters for lining the hat, and I'll show you that variation. You are sewing through 3 layers, so take your time and make sure that the raw edges are even as you sew. Turn it right side facing out. If you're making the hat with a chin strap, you'll need something to snap it together or adhere it together under the chin. I really like using this adhesive Velcro. You can cut a strip of that and you only need like 1 inch of it, and this is 3/4 inch. You can stick it to it so you're not having to use bulky pins when you're trying to sew it on. Works really well, and the adhesive washes off when you launder your product. Or you can use snaps, and I really like these Kam Snaps, and I'll show you how to apply those. Now I'm going to show you the lined version and the chin strap version. And I'm going to use my single needle machine just to show you how doable it is to use on a regular sewing machine. For the lining, I have cut out 4 of the crown pieces out of an upcycled t-shirt. Now if you use a t-shirt or knit fabric, you want to make sure that it does have plenty of stretch to it. We're going to sew it together just as we did the other, starting with the headband piece. So I've set my machine to the lightning bolt stitch, or you can use the simple zigzag stitch. And I almost prefer that, because if you have to unpick that lightning bolt stitch, it can be quite the burger. So we're going to adjust our settings on that stitch to 1.5 wide and 1.5 long. I'm using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now see how that fabric kind of got sucked into the machine a little bit and wasn't moving forward very well? A trick to keep that from happening is to take a piece of scrap fleece, and when you start sewing your seam, place that scrap underneath, take a few stitches, and then take the piece that you're working on and just butt it up against the edge and start sewing. And you can back stitch. And for some reason it helps that presser foot stay level and doesn't suck the fabric into the machine, which can be so frustrating when you're sewing on knits because it will usually make a hole in the fabric. So just a tip there. So I'm going to take these seams down to just 1/4 of an inch. And for the headband piece, we'll want to notch out these curves so that when we turn it in right side facing out, it will lay smooth. We're going to clip the corners. Make sure that you're not cutting into the seam. When you're sewing the lining crown piece, when you sew those two pieces together, you want to leave an opening about 2 inches or 1.5 inches to turn it right side facing out. I'm going to sew up to this point, back stitch, lift up my presser foot and go that 2 inches and then continue sewing. Seam allowance on both the liner and the outer crown pieces. Ready to apply the outer crown piece. I'm going to flip the headband so the wrong side's facing out. Flip the crown piece so it's right side facing out and just line up all those quarter points. And the key from keeping those points aligned is to use lots of pins around those points, especially in the front and the back where it tends to shift a little bit. Since we are going to be sewing in the lining as well, this first time around the hat, I'm just going to use a straight basting stitch, which is a long straight stitch like at the length 4. Now to apply the lining to the hat, flip your hat with the wrong side, the inside facing out, the lining of the hat wrong side facing out, and we're going to just stuff the hat inside, line up all your quarter points and pin it in place. Switch your machine stitch back to your stretch stitch, which I'm using that zigzag stitch, or you can use the lightning bolt stitch, and I'm going to follow that basting stitch that I already sewed. Flip your seam allowance down to that 1/4 inch. Find the hole that you left and grab a piece of the hat inside and start pulling it out through that hole. Now you need to close off that hole, and you can either, since it's on the inside, it's not going to be seen, just tuck in the seam allowance, and using a very small seam allowance, like 1/8 of an inch, you can just stitch down that opening and then it'll open up. You will see the stitching, but that's an option, or I like to use a needle and thread and use the ladder stitch or the slip stitch to close that off. And I'll show you real quick how to do that. Double thread a needle and knot the end. Wrap it around your finger a couple times and roll it with your fingers, and then just pull it, and that'll make a knot. Tuck the seam allowance in and bring your needle out just on the end of the stitching there. Get rid of the pin. Just do it, tuck it in as I go. So I'll tuck those edges in and take a stitch in the fold of the fabric. Insert your needle across into the next fold, the other side, and just take a little tiny stitch into the fold. Go across to the other side, directly across, and take a little stitch in the fold. And go across into the fold, little stitch, until you get down to the end. When you get down to the end, poke the needle out, take a little stitch into the fabric, leave a loop, wrap the needle around that loop a couple times and gently pull it, and that will create a knot. Insert your needle in and then pull it out and clip your thread. Now we're ready to apply the snaps or the Velcro to the hat. I recommend putting 2 snaps in. That way you can adjust it as they grow, so you can have it say tight like this or like this. If you're applying the Velcro strips, I really like using this Velcro that has a sticky back. That way you can apply it to your project without having to put pins in it, because when you put pins in it, it tends to shift while you're sewing around the outside. So this is really helpful. Not that you have to use the adhesive kind, but I really like it, especially for small projects like this. So one side, it'll come with 2 strips, one with a nice fluffy side and one with a rough side, and that is what makes it stick together. So you'll be cut out a 1-inch strip of both of the front and the back Velcro pieces, and I'm going to remove the backing, and at the bottom I'm going to center that just about a 1/4 inch from the edge of each side. To apply the other, I like to just adhere it to the bumpy side. I'll remove the sticky from the fluffy side and then bring those together where you want it to be. Squeeze it together and it will stick, so that we can pull them apart now and we can go to the sewing machine and sew all the way around. So there you have it, your Velcro application, really nice for the little ones. Now let me show you how to put on Kam Snap or snaps on the chin strap. If you haven't worked with Kam Snaps before, you'll have to give it a try because they are so easy to use. They come in so many colors. I have used them on my reversible bibs. You can use them for so many applications. So I'm going to show you how to apply them real quick onto this chin strap. I will put the link in the description below where you can get these snaps and even a little kit. They're really quite affordable to use, and as you can see, you can get them in all colors. And these snaps are size 20, and I find that that's a good general size to have on hand. So we're going to make it so that you can adjust it in 2 different sizes. So you'll need 3 of these thumbtack looking pieces, 2 female pieces which look like a little, see if you can see what they look like up close. So they have kind of like a little cup like that, a little dip, where the male have an outward circle type thing. So let's see if I can hold that so you can see the difference. You see that? So we only need 1 of the male and 2 of the female. Let's locate where we want the snaps to be. We're going to be applying 2 of the female snaps. So I'm going to go about a 1/2 inch from the edge and in the center. I'm going to find that center and use the awl that comes with it. It's a really pokey, sharp awl that you use to poke the holes with. So I'm going to find that place and just poke it into both layers and poke it in and move it around a little bit so that you can see, I can see that hole on this part. So I'll apply that thumbtack piece from the back to the front through the hole. Poke it through until you can see the thumbtack portion and you can feel it. And then take the female piece with the cup side facing up and place it onto the pokey part of the, you can hear that snap in place. So to completely secure, take your pliers and with the back side of the tack, place it in this black rubber thing. And there's you can see there's a little indentation there. And then slip that. And you can feel it kind of snap in place where it needs to be. And then you can just give it a good squeeze. And then remove it. Then you have one of the two snaps that we're going to apply here. So I'm going to measure 1 inch from the center of that snap up the chin strap. Just find the center point between the two edges. And I'm going to poke my awl in there again. Give it a little jiggle so we have a nice hole that I can see. You can see that. So now we need to apply the other snap to the chin strap. This time we're going to apply the thumbtack piece from the right side to the wrong side. And again, we're going to measure just that 1/2 inch from the edge, center it, and then make your hole. Again, from the front to the back this time. Take a male piece now. There you have your adjustable snaps. You have your tighter fit here, and if you need it a little bit bigger, there you go. Love these snaps. Now let me show you the attached scarf version of the hat. I have cut out a piece of fleece that is the width of the yardage that it comes on the bolt, which is usually 58 to 62 inches by 8 inches. Fold that strip in half, mark the halfway point with a pin. Grab your hat. I have sewn it just like I did the other hat. You'll just sew that headband piece the same way. Instead of sewing along the bottom or whatever, I've sewn that to a point. It's indicated on the pattern how to cut that out. So cut out that headband piece following the guidelines for the scarf application and sew it up. I'm going to take the right side, the outside of the hat, and line it up with the right side of my scarf. Line up the edges. I'm not going to pull it or stretch it. Just let it lie on the hat and then pin that end. And all you'll do is take it to the sewing machine, and with the scarf facing up, start along the edge, use your 3/4 inch seam allowance and sew all the way down and backstitch. And that is it. Let's go to the sewing machine. I'm using just a regular straight stitch. I have increased the length to a 3, and I'm starting right on the edge of that hat. You'll want to backstitch, of course, at the beginning and the end of your seam. You don't even need to finish off these edges. In this edge right here, when you put it on, it will just naturally curl under just a little bit, and that is ideal. These edges are not going to fray. Fits on the head so nicely, fits around the neck, keeps the neck warm. Such a fun option for this fleece hat. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial and that you're ready and set to make some cozy fleece hats. 3 different ways, 3 different applications. And if you wanted to embellish these hats with a label, I have a tutorial where I show you how to make those labels. Real easy thing to do. You can line the hats with fleece or an upcycled t-shirt. So many different color combinations and several different sizes. Once again, I'll put the link for the pattern in the description below. Send me a note if you have any questions. If you found this tutorial helpful, make sure you give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you want some other fleece projects, check out my other fleece tutorials. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.